All right. I will start off with an update on the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and I can tell you that obviously we are deeply concerned by the situation in South Kivu, particularly, which remains very volatile, with credible reports that the M23 is moving rapidly towards the city of Bukavu. In addition, our colleagues in the peacekeeping mission say that there are reports of Rwandan defense forces cross-border movements in that direction. Clashes are continuing to be reported between the M23 and the Congolese armed forces and allied forces south of Minova in South Kivu. As a reminder, peacekeepers withdrew from South Kivu province in June of last year. Today, our colleagues are also concerned about humanitarian security risks, particularly interethnic conflict in the absence of UN peacekeeping forces in that area. In Goma, which is in North Kivu province, the situation remains tense and volatile, with occasional shooting continuing within the city. Water and electricity have been off for almost a week, and unexploded ordnance remains a serious obstacle to freedom of movement of people, humanitarians, and peacekeepers. The mission was able, however, to take a few reconnaissance patrols yesterday within the city to begin the process of assessing damage, and number of peacekeeping positions were able to be resupplied. The airport runway in Goma sustained significant damage in the recent fighting and remains non-operational. The peacekeeping mission is obviously operating in an extremely challenging environment and is being tested. However, their priorities remain the protection of the many civilians sheltering within its premises, as well as the protection of its own personnel and assets. Meanwhile, the mission leadership is multiplying engagements with on the political front pushing towards a cessation of hostilities. Yesterday, Bintou Keita, the special representative of the Secretary General and head of that peacekeeping mission, met with the Prime Minister of the DRC, Judith Tuluka, key ministers, as well as the leadership of the Congolese army and police, and they agreed to establish a joint government, a MONUSCO working group to closely work on all relevant issues. A little bit more on the humanitarian situation in that country. Our colleagues at the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs say our partners are beginning to move around the city of Goma to assess the damage to their warehouses in the wake of looting. Aid organizations plan to resume provision of humanitarian aid tomorrow with the capacity and stocks available, obviously, if the security situation permits this. Today, the local Congolese Red Cross, with the support of the International Committee of the Red Cross, continued to remove numerous corpses throughout Goma to mitigate public health issues. Since the beginning of January, our humanitarian partners have recorded and treated more than 1,000 injuries caused by weapons and explosive devices in Goma and other areas affected by the violence. Our colleagues at the World Health Organization tell us that hospitals in Goma are not surprisingly saturated with the influx of wounded people. WHO says the risk of spread of mpox, cholera, and measles have increased due to people leaving healthcare facilities where they had been receiving treatment for those diseases. They also say that the disruption of the water supply in Goma over the last 6 days is compounding the risk of spread of cholera and other waterborne diseases. Yesterday and today, the humanitarian coordinator for the United Nations, Bruno Lemarquis, and head of the OCHA office in the DRC, Carla Martinez, met with government authorities to discuss the humanitarian assistance in Goma and in North Kivu. Our colleagues at UNHCR today reiterated our calls for humanitarian access and for the safety of civilians, including aid workers, and that all their safety be respected. They also called on the right to seek asylum to be upheld and for civilians to be allowed to move to safer areas. UNHCR is working with the governments and partners in the countries neighboring the DRC on updating interagency contingency plans and stands ready to support any new arrivals from the latest crisis, including nearly 600 people who have requested asylum in Rwanda in the past few days. Turning to the other situation we're obviously following closely, and that is a situation concerning our colleagues at UNRWA. I can tell you that UNRWA told us today, and we've been speaking to them by phone a number of times this morning, that they are continuing to deliver assistance and services to the communities they're serving. UNRWA clinics across the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are open. Meanwhile, the humanitarian operations in Gaza continues, including with UNRWA work there. UNRWA says it is committed to staying and delivering. And turning to the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that more displaced families are returning to northern Gaza as the ceasefire continues to hold. Since the opening of the Salah ad-Din and al-Rashid roads on Monday, our partners estimate that more than 462,000 people have crossed from south to the north. We and our humanitarian partners are assisting those on the move by providing water, high-energy biscuits, and medical care along the two routes. The World Food Program, for its part, says it plans to set up more distribution points in the north this week as people continue to return. Our partners also report that displaced Palestinians are also moving from north to south, albeit in smaller numbers, with about 1,400 people traveling in that direction as of today. Across Gaza, extensive efforts are underway to restore critical services. Yesterday, fuel was delivered to 5 bakeries in Gaza City, ensuring that they can operate at full capacity for a week. 13 bakeries in the south and central Gaza continue to function at full capacity. The World Food Program tells us that they've delivered more than 10 million metric tons of food to Gaza since the ceasefire took effect. And in North Gaza, Governor, yesterday, UNICEF distributed 135 cubic meters of water to communities in Jabalia, Beit Laia, and Beit Hanun, areas that had been besieged for over 3 months. And we also, as we mentioned yesterday, 35,000 liters of fuel were delivered to northern Gaza yesterday to sustain operations at water, sanitation, and hygiene facilities. Water trucking in Rafah is also being scaled up. We and our partners are supporting efforts to restore critical civilian infrastructure. Humanitarian partners are coordinating with the Gaza Electricity Distribution Company to repair the damaged power lines that feed the South Gaza desalination plant, which is currently running on fuel, and it's obviously critical for access to fresh water for the people who depend on it. Turning to the West Bank, OCHA tells us that Israeli forces operations in northern area have expanded beyond Jenin and Tulkarem in the nearby governorate of Tubas. Yesterday, an Israeli airstrike hit a group of Palestinians in the village of Tamun in Tubas Governorate. Reportedly, 10 people were killed. This brings the death toll on the ongoing Israeli operations in northern West Bank to 30, with including 2 children. Overall, more than 3,200 families have been displaced from Jenin refugee camp in the context of the Palestinian and Israeli security operations since December. That's what local authorities are telling us. Our humanitarian partners are continuing to deliver aid, including food parcels, kitchen kits, baby supplies, hygiene items, medicines, and other essential supplies to those who need it. Turning to yet another situation we're watching, and we're coming up on an anniversary, and that is Myanmar. And I have a statement to share with you. 4 years since the military seized power and arbitrarily detained members of the democratically elected government on February 1st, 2001, the situation in Myanmar continues to deteriorate with devastating consequences for civilians. The Secretary General condemns all forms of violence and calls on all parties to the conflict to exercise maximum restraint, uphold human rights and international humanitarian law, and prevent further incitement of violence and intercommunal tensions. The Secretary General reiterates his concern regarding the military's stated intention to hold elections amid intensifying conflict, including aerial bombardment and widespread human rights violations, and without the conditions that permit the people of Myanmar to freely and peacefully exercise their political rights, including safety and security. Over 19.9 million people in Myanmar, that's more than 1/3 of the population of the country need humanitarian assistance, compared to only 1 million before the military took over 4 years ago. Unimpeded access must be assured to enable the UN and our partners to continue to deliver humanitarian assistance and essential services. The Secretary General renews his call for greater cooperation among all stakeholders to bring an end to the hostilities and help the people of Myanmar forge a path towards an inclusive, democratic transition and a return to civilian rule. He also appeals to countries in the region to grant access to safety and protection of those fleeing conflict and persecution, and for the international community to provide greater support to countries, including Bangladesh, who are hosting a large population of refugees from Myanmar. The Secretary General's Special Envoy, Julie Bishop, remains actively engaged with all stakeholders in close cooperation with ASEAN in the search of a Myanmar-led resolution to this crisis. A viable future for Myanmar must ensure safety, it must ensure accountability, and it must ensure opportunity for all communities, including the Rohingya, and address the root causes of conflict, of discrimination, and disenfranchisement in all its forms. The Secretary General reaffirms the unwavering support of the United Nations to the people of Myanmar in these efforts. And just to give you a bit more dramatic granularity in the humanitarian situation there, our colleagues at the World Food Program today warned that hunger has reached alarming levels in Myanmar. A staggering 15 million human beings are expected to face hunger in 2025, up from 13.3 million last year. Those living in active conflict areas, particularly in Chin, in Kachin, Rakhine states, as well as Sangay region, are experiencing the highest level of food insecurity in the country. More than 3.5 million people are displaced in Myanmar due to violence, a number projected to increase to 4.5 million in 2025 as conflict spreads to new areas. Food is their biggest need, but rapid inflation has made it unaffordable for many. The cost of basic staples, including rice, beans, oil, and salt, increased 30% just in the last year. The World Food Program aims to reach 1.6 million people in Myanmar with life-saving food, nutrition, and resilience-building support in the coming year. And this morning, the Secretary General spoke at the meeting of the Peace-Building Commission, telling ambassadors that our world is in trouble with spreading conflicts and widening geopolitical divisions, as you've just heard. He said that the Pact for the Future charts a course to reforming international cooperation, including by prioritizing prevention, mediation, and peace building. And fundamentally, the Pact calls for strengthening the Peace-Building Commission, he added. The Secretary General notes that this year's review of the peace-building architecture offers an opportunity to further advance these efforts and strengthen the role of the Peace-Building Commission, namely in relationship to the Security Council, adding that the General Assembly's approval of assessed contribution for the Peace-Building Fund marks an important step, but it's still a far cry from the quantum leap of $500 million per year that is needed. This morning, our Special Envoy for Syria, Geir Pedersen, briefed the Security Council in close consultation. He did so from Syria. He remains in Damascus, and his engagements these past few weeks, including discussions with the caretaker authorities, as well as Syrians from various political groups, women's groups, civil society, experts, and individuals from diverse regions and backgrounds. Additionally, he continues to engage with a wide range of interlocutors from relevant states. Regarding the transitional developments, Mr. Pedersen took note of the announcement from Damascus, and I can tell you that he remains actively engaged on the ground, closely assessing developments and consulting these matters. We continue to support a credible inclusive, Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political transition that addresses the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people in accordance with the core principle of Security Council Resolution 2254. That includes transitional governance, the drafting of a new constitution, and the holding of free and fair elections. Meanwhile, on the ground, the humanitarian situation in Syria remains dire. We and our partners are continuing to support the humanitarian response as security allows. OCHA is telling us that between November 27th and 27th of January, 3.3 million people across Syria received bread, while over 418,000 people were reached with other food aid, including ready-to-eat rations and hot meals. Our partners are working in health, continuing to support the response, including by deploying mobile medical units and support for critical medical cases in collective centers, hosting displaced people and in the governorates of Al-Raqqa, Al-Hasake, and eastern Aleppo. But the needs are indeed immense. Our partners report that health facilities across the country are affected by structural damage and lack of funding. At the same time, the lack of public services and persisting economic challenges across the country continue to take a toll on communities and the humanitarian response. Many households are unable to put food on the table because of reduced purchasing power and limited employment opportunities. That is true especially in rural areas. And in Sudan, WFP tells us that more food and nutrition assistance is on the way to Wad Midani in Al Jazeera state. In just weeks, the food agency delivered food for nearly 50,000 people in the city who are at risk of famine. It is said that this is how quickly it can ramp up to aid the Sudanese people if a safe passage is provided. In other areas of Sudan, intensified fighting and the arbitrary obstruction of humanitarian convoys are hindering the fast and consistent movement of desperately needed aid. Just last month, the convoy crossing at Adre in Chad and heading for Darfur took 3 times longer to reach its destination. That was due to interference, just as needing to obtain new clearances and needing additional inspections. It finally reached its destination earlier this week, but it took the convoy 6 weeks after its departure to reach its destination for a journey that normally would take a maximum of 2 weeks. We call over and over again on all parties on the ground in Sudan to remove all unnecessary barriers and obstacles that are preventing our humanitarian response to the growing hunger crisis in the country. The neutrality and independence of aid workers and humanitarian work must be respected. WFP is working to expand food and nutrition assistance to millions more people across Sudan, but it's without guarantee of safe passage and humanitarian assistance. Hard to reach and famine-struck areas, this task will be much more difficult. And on Ukraine, our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that an attack in the residential areas of Sumy overnight resulted in a number of fatalities. That's what local authorities and humanitarians on the ground are telling us. Humanitarian partners mobilized an emergency response, complementing the efforts of first responders and the authorities. They delivered materials to cover damaged windows and provide meals and psychological first aid to residents who lost their homes. The rescue operation is ongoing. Across Ukraine, relentless hostilities and attacks today and yesterday resulted in the casualties and extensive damage to civilian infrastructure, according to local authorities. In the Donetsk region, police reports damage to civilian infrastructure in Kharkiv. Local authorities say that attacks in the town of Kupiansk injured at least 3 medical workers and damaged an ambulance. The school was damaged in the Dnipro region, and in Odessa region, hospital was damaged. We, along with our partners in Ukraine, continue to support the frontline communities devastated by the war. Over the course of last year, nearly 50 humanitarian convoys delivered 580 metric tons of humanitarian supplies across the country. And lastly, on a tragic note, much closer here, we're of course devastated by the news of dozens of people having been killed following the tragic collision of a civilian plane and a military helicopter over the Potomac in Washington. We're aware of reports that in addition to American citizens, there are other citizens of other nations, notably the Russian Federation among the casualties. We extend our condolences to all those who have lost loved ones. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. On UNRWA, can you give us some details of what, if anything, happened at the 2 UNRWA facilities in East Jerusalem that Israel specifically ordered to be closed today?
I mean, what I know from the conversations I've had is that there is very little news to report. There was in front of our headquarters in Sheikh Jarrah area, there was a small demonstrations early this morning that disbanded very quickly. I mean, what my colleague told me is that there were more reporters than demonstrators. The building continues to fly the UN flag. As I mentioned, I think in answer to Gabriel Orbeno yesterday, we had taken precautions. All the equipment inside, files, computers, everything had been removed, our vehicles as well, and of course some 24 UNRWA international staff whose visas had were no longer valid have left for Jordan, I believe.
So just to clarify, so there were national staff from UNRWA who were actually in the facilities, and the Israelis made no attempt to take them over?
My understanding is that the headquarter building is empty of staff. There's some security guards, civilian, unarmed local security company that we contract with that are there. But the UNRWA staff is doing what it should be doing, which is working in the clinics and other places they work in the region. Deji.
Yes, a follow-up on UNRWA. Just a further clarification. You said that the headquarters of UNRWA in East Jerusalem now has been emptied with staff. So where are the people working from to?
They've moved to other locations in the occupied West Bank, or some are working from home.
So UNRWA said they have not received any official communications from Israel how they would implement that.
I mean, I think that's been. There was a long exchange yesterday with some of your colleagues here in this room. That remains the same.
So, okay. Which means you said those international staffers, their visas has been,
the visas were expiring. I think they all expired.
No new visas.
They all expired yesterday. The ones that were working in East Jerusalem, so they left.
One more question on Syria. Mr. Geir Pedersen was in Damascus.
He is in Damascus.
Okay, yeah. He is in Damascus. He is still communicating with the de facto authorities. Now, since al-Assad has been removed, we still see, I think, a little process in the political front. What does Mr. Pedersen think would be the reason there?
Look, Deji, I think that's an analysis question. I mean, we can only go through by the consultations we're having, and I think I briefed on what Mr. Pedersen, the highlights of what Mr. Pedersen shared with the Security Council. It is obviously, and to state the absolute obvious, it is a country that is going through turmoil, right? Both political and humanitarian. Our aim is to move along based on the core principles of Resolution 2254, which I've repeated often. Sherwin.
Stefan, the Rwandan Foreign Ministry this week said that the ongoing conflict in eastern DRC, particularly the recent heavy fighting around Goma, was triggered by constant violations of the ceasefire by the Congolese armed forces, the FARDC, in coalition with UN-sanctioned genocidal militia, the FDLR, European mercenaries, ethnic militias, Wazalendo, Burundian armed forces, Sami DRC forces, as well as MONUSCO troops. How do you respond to that allegation?
I can tell you that MONUSCO troops are not involved in ceasefire violations because they are not a party to the conflict. They are peacekeepers, right? It is a challenge to do their job right now because there's clearly no peace to keep. There is a political solution. There is a political roadmap, the Luanda process. And our efforts on the political end is to get the parties to re-engage and recommit to the commitments already made under that process.
This peacekeeping force in particular has a force intervention brigade that has an offensive mandate. So when you say peacekeepers, I mean, you're not just talking about people protecting civilians. There's a mandate to engage.
They are there to... those force intervention brigade, they are there to be actively protecting civilians and enforcing our mandate. And I think what has been clear is that peacekeepers in the Democratic Republic of the Congo have, many of them from your own country, have paid the ultimate price in the implementation of a mandate given to them by the Security Council of these United Nations. Tony.
Shukran, Steph. Any reactions from the SG on Ahmad al-Shara being named Syria's transitional president?
Well, I mean, I think the reaction is what I just read out from Mr. Pedersen, taking note of the events. You know, we're not in the business of recognizing governments. That's a matter for intergovernmental bodies to decide. Our wish, often stated, is to get back to creating a Syrian-led, Syrian-owned process for transition, for reconciliation, all those things that are at the heart of that Security Council resolution for the benefit of the Syrian people who have suffered so much in the last years and continue to suffer, as I've mentioned in our humanitarian updates. I think all those in power in Syria, all those who have an influence, have a duty to ensure that we all work towards that same goal.
Just a quick follow-up. What we were trying to understand here, do you consider a step as such aligned with the vision that you just described?
The vision is one for Syrian-led, Syrian-owned process. I think, you know, getting to the heart of 2254 will not be a straight line. Carrie. Sorry.
Thank you, Steph.
I'll get to everybody. Yes.
Thank you, Steph. Just a quick question. I'm a bit at loss, like Daiju here, about UNRWA's facilities in East Jerusalem. You said, I understand that the international staff left, but as the local staff, is it still working in these two facilities, or these two facilities are...
No, I mean, what I was talking about is the headquarters, right, which is an administrative headquarters. The facilities that UNRWA runs, the health clinics and other facilities, which are smaller and within neighborhoods, are functioning, and UNRWA staff are reporting to work.
And as a quick follow-up, the SG was protesting through his letter to Israel on Monday and begged Israel to go back through these, to go back on these laws. What are the next steps for the SG here? Because, like, having a UN HQ being closed, or it's really against international law. So what are the next steps for him?
I mean, I think we've laid out our view in terms of international law and how the laws and the actions passed, we think are against those. You know, it's not so much the next step. What is going to happen and what is happening is that UNRWA will continue to deliver on its mandate. And I think Mr. Lazzarini has been very clear on that until they're no longer able to do so. And the consequences of them no longer being able to do so are both legal and obviously, just as important, very practical.
So then a quick follow-up. Do you think in the next mission being given to an agency of the UN, the GA should be very clear, saying that the international staff should be treated equally as the local staff?
I mean, I think that's already, all of the commitments are there and already pretty clear. Abdelhamid, then Pam, and then Sirife, and
thank
then
you,
Linda.
Stefan. I have a few questions too. I will start with Syria. I mean, the Emir of Qatar had arrived in Syria, the first head of state to visit Syria. The Russian Federation sent a senior delegate yesterday. I think world leaders in general reached out to the new leadership, except the Secretary General. Why he didn't pick up the phone and talk to Ahmad al-Shara himself, not Geir Peterson? We know that he's there, he's working, he's contacting everyone. Why the SG did not just make a phone call to give them some moral support, or maybe demand how the transitional period should go?
The Secretary General, I mean, the Secretary General is engaging through Mr. Pedersen through private diplomacy, through engaged diplomacy. Mr. Pedersen, has been there for I think more than 2 weeks. He's going to be there for some time. When the circumstances are right, when the time is right, there may be an upgrade, as you could say, in the level of contact.
You narrated to us what happened in Tammuz. 10 Palestinians were killed, the total people killed in the last few weeks by Israeli incursion, 30, including 2 children. But we haven't heard your opinion about the SG's opinion. You just told us the news, which we all know about.
We've consistently expressed our concern and condemn the death of any civilians and attacks on civilian infrastructure. Faddale.
Thank you.
Faddal, sorry. Sorry, yeah. I'm going to fire Shireen, my Arabic teacher.
2 Palestinians died in jail, Muhammad al-Asali and Ibrahim Ashur. That brings the total of Palestinians killed due to different reasons, mainly medical negligence, in Israeli jail since October 7, 58. Do you have any opinion?
I'm not aware of that particular case, but I know we and our human rights colleagues have spoken out about the dire conditions of the Palestinian detainees. I can't remember. Pam, and then.
Thanks, Steph. There's some very recent reports in the last few hours about an Ebola case in Uganda. Do you have any concern about leadership of WHO and funding for WHO without U.S. being in the organization?
We have no concern about the leadership of WHO. Obviously, it will have they will be funding challenges, and I haven't heard about the particular case of Ebola, but clearly the critical and central role of the World Health Organization in managing and controlling the outbreak of such deadly viruses is critical. Sarife. And then
Thank you, Stefan. I have a question on a different topic. I'm sure you might have seen President Trump has ordered the preparation of Guantanamo Bay to hold up to 30,000 migrants. And as you may recall, Guantanamo has a rather bleak image and history, and it's recalled by many as an inhumane detention and torture center. So how does the UN react to this order from President Trump?
Well, I mean, we've seen comments that this may actually happen. I mean, our position remains the same because we have seen other countries sort of offshore these types of issues, and it's crucial that any measures taken when it relates to mitigating migration, to asylum seekers, respect the fundamental rights to seek asylum, as well as the full respect for the dignity and rights of migrants. Yes, Linda, and then we'll go to the back.
Thank you, Steph. Earlier this week, when there was concern that the U.S. was going to, pause foreign aid, and the SG obviously said he was very concerned about it. But in a UN news article, by the UN Information Division, it said that more than 40% of all humanitarian aid accounted for by the UN during 2024 was American. I know America.
Sorry, say again.
It said, I just read it, I have it. More than 40% of all humanitarian aid accounted for by the United Nations during 2024 was American aid. I mean, more than 40% is astronomical. I mean, it's way, it's at least 50%, if not more, than its assessment. Given, and of course, you earlier today, and there are all these crises going on around the world. I mean, is it prudent for the UN to be so dependent on one country in the sense that is the UN looking to others to ask them to be more generous as well?
Our appeal for every member state that has the ability to give to our humanitarian appeals is consistent and it is loud. The fact is that the United States has been a leader and remains extremely generous in its contributions to the UN's humanitarian work. But I can tell you, from having been here quite some time, it's not from not knocking on many doors of many capitals asking for money at a time when the humanitarian needs of the organization have never been greater, right? So we've spared no effort. The fact that the U.S., according to data, provides that 40% is not, in a sense, it's not the UN's fault, right? Because we would like others to step up. We would like to diversify our base, and we're very thankful for that U.S. generosity, but we would like to see other countries do the same. Yes, right in the back, and then
Thank you,
front.
Steph. It's Eric with Kyoto News.
Yeah.
So I have two questions on Myanmar. First, on the statement. From the point of view of the Secretary General, so he thinks the military's plans to hold the election should not go forward.
That's correct. That would be a correct interpretation.
All right.
Not given the climate of violence, of internal displacement, of there is a situation on the ground which would make it extremely difficult for people to be able to participate in an electoral process when they're hungry, when they're forced to move from their homes, right? To just state two obvious reasons.
And second, today there's consultations being held in the UN Security Council. What will the UN briefers say
On
Myanmar?
I will get you an update on that.
Okay. Thank
Okay. Margaret, then Michelle, then Stefano, then Sinan, and then we'll go to the screen with Prince Elatina and Mike, who I will not forget today. Go ahead, please,
Just
Michelle.
following up, Eric, is Julie Bishop here in person?
It's a very valid question, which I will try to get an answer to,
Okay,
hopefully
and then,
before the end of this torture session.
On UNRWA, or aid in general to Gaza, can you just remind us, is Rafah crossing reopened since the ceasefire? Do you guys have access to Egypt?
Most of the aid that's coming in right now is coming through Karim Shalom and Erez West, I believe, some of the different crossings.
So in terms of
I need to
staff-
check on the operational aspect of Rafah and how our staff are getting in and out.
So as Israel withdraws its cooperation with UNRWA, do you have options in terms of their staff and supplies going in and out through northern Gaza to Jordan or through Rafah into the south?
UNRWA trucks are continuing to go in, as far as I understand, through Karim Shalom. Other agencies are using other crossings. Michelle Nichols, Reuters.
So on that note, Israel is communicating, I guess, via other agencies? Because they said they're not going to talk to UNRWA?
I can only tell you what is going on. And from my understanding, from my conversations with colleagues at UNRWA, is that they're continuing to do their work. That would I would leave that to journalists to do a compare and contrast from yesterday to today.
Okay, and when's the SG going to come and do his press conference? I mean, he's upstairs.
Stefano.
Thank you, Stefan. About comparing and contrast. What the Secretary General had been, he issued a statement about what's happening in the DRC, but he, at least to me, seems like he's not acting toward the Security Council like he did in the past, for example, with messages, letters, when we were just talking about Burma, when he was very, very, he was afraid that something, that genocide or violence, extreme violence could have happened. So the question is, although the situation is pretty bad, but does the Secretary General think that at the end of all of this, there is just, a military occupation by these rebels of a city and maybe another city, but it's not so, the life of the civilian is so much in danger.
At the end of all of this, we want to see a return to the political process, right? All of these issues, and I don't think you were here, but I said this the other day, that the problems in the Eastern DRC have been going on for decades, right? For as long as I've been at the UN and before, as we all know. They're not going to be solved in a day. They're going to be solved through a political dialogue. They've been efforts after efforts, right? Right now we have the Luanda process, and we want people to return to it. The Secretary General has been actively engaged. He spoke to President Kagame. He spoke to President Tshisekedi. He's speaking a couple of times a day to his representative, both in Kinshasa and to our representative in Goma, as is Mr. Lacroix. I think different issues are different places within the Security Council. I mean, this is a peacekeeping mission that is there under the authority and the mandate of the Security Council.
So, just to clarify, exactly what I think, from your reaction in the last few days, it seems that at the end he's not so preoccupied like it would have been in other situations.
I would disabuse you of thinking that he's not preoccupied. On the contrary. Okay, let's go to the screen. Let's go to Prensa Latina, and then we'll go to Mike.
Thank you, Steve. My question is different topic. On January 14, former U.S. President Joseph Biden removed Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism, based on the consideration of several state agencies, which ratified that Cuba has not engaged in any action of this kind. However, 6 days later, on his first day as president, Donald Trump decided to put Cuba back on that list without presenting any new evidence disregarding the war and criteria of the state agencies. My question, isn't this contradictory and harmful for the international fight against terrorism? Doesn't this make this unilateral listing even more questionable, considering that the Secretary General has recognized that Cuba's behavior in some mediation process, including that of Colombia, is not what one would expect from a country accused of sponsor terrorism?
Daisy, thank you for your question. I would just want to recall to you that we welcomed the U.S. announcement on January 14th regarding, among other measures, the removal of Cuba from the State Department's list of state sponsors of terrorism. And at this point, I don't have any further comment. Mr. Mike.
Sir, hope you're doing well today. A couple questions. This one had been deemed hypothetical for the longest time. It's no longer hypothetical. What is the directive at this point to UNRWA in terms of handing off some of their responsibilities that they're no longer able to facilitate or implement to other UN agencies in Gaza, whether it be the World Food Program, whether it be whatever it is? Is the directive to them to cooperate, or is it, as it was previously reported, to discourage them from cooperating because UNRWA's mandate is UNRWA's mandate and you can't touch it? What is the directive at this point? It's got to be something.
The directive is that UNRWA will continue to do its work until it no longer can. There is no, which is what is going on today. There are no instructions or directives for UNRWA not to work in close cooperation with other UN agencies. They are part of the UN's humanitarian system, whether in Gaza or in other places, and they work constructively with other UN agencies. But as I'll recall, the humanitarian slice of UNRWA's work is a sliver of the work they do on education and health, which, in a sense, in an emergency warlike situation, is also humanitarian work. And I think especially those parts of the organization's work are irreplaceable. And UNRWA's mandate was given to it by the General Assembly of these United Nations.
So there's no the UN is a huge organization. It has contingency plans. It has plans B, C, and it's a competent organization, even if one disagrees with its policies. And so there has to be something that says, when this part of your mandate fails, when you're no longer able to do this, here is what you do next. Some sort of fire plan.
Mike, I'm not saying.
What is it?
Mike, I'm not saying that we're not aware of the general situation. What I'm telling you is I can speak to today is that UNRWA is continuing its work.
Last question for you, if I can squeeze in one more. The UNRWA Humanitarian Dashboard, which had been logging trucks going into Gaza since the beginning of the war, went dark essentially a day after the ceasefire was signed. Why is UNRWA no longer tracking trucks going into Gaza since the ceasefire?
Let us look into that issue, and I will revert you. And I think I forgot Sinan here, who had a question. And I know you guys have another briefing to attend, so if you need to go, go. I won't be offended.
I will be quick. Thank you, Steph. The transitional government in Syria announced that cancellation of Syria's 2012 constitution, and you said that Mr. Gay Pedersen this morning was saying he expects a free and fair election and also a new constitution in Syria. So, does he have any time frame for that?
I mean, he continues to. I don't have anything else to add than what I've already said on his vision of a transition. Okay. Oh, sorry. Yes, sir.
Stefan, follow up on Linda's question. She said that U.S. participates with 40% on the aid. What is the percentage of China and Russia in that?
All of those figures are available on our on the websites, and you could ask our colleagues at OCHA, but all of those are very public figures, which doesn't mean that they're stored in my head. Sherwin, and then I'm pulling the ripcord here.
Wrap your time in the torture chamber. Just clarity, in terms of MONUSCO's withdrawal, right, from South Kivu, you now talk about an advance by M23 towards Bukavu, which is the capital. Does that change the posture of MONUSCO? Will they be going back into South Kivu?
It doesn't change the... It doesn't change the fact that they're not in South Kivu. We are taking a number of precautions for relocation of some staff, but it doesn't change the fact that they're not there. Okay. Thank you all. Hasta mañana. Love being here. Love it, love it, love it. What? And he doesn't pay attention.
It was cancelled.